Welcome into a special Tuesday edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the FFPC on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman. You can connect with me on the X and Blue Sky, actually, at Eric Balkman. Of course, you know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Kicking it to you live this week since we weren't going to have a show on Thursday because of Thanksgiving, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. We're going to do a show live tonight at Tuesday all the way until 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. The guy who is sitting shotgun, my co-pilot for this evening, from Fantasy Alarm. You follow him on the X at J Impemba 777. It is Jon Impemba. Jon, welcome in, man. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure to finally connect. You and I had a few conversations about coming on here with you, and finally we're able to get the schedules to align here this week.
You know what's funny is every time I see you post on X, I'm always like, oh, I got to get Jim Pemba on this show. I got to get Jim Pemba. Is that how your screen name is? And I'm like, it's not Jim Pemba. It's Jon Impemba every time I see it. But I'm just thrilled we could chop it up tonight. Before we get started, I know you are a big NBA guy. Give the viewers a little bit of a taste of what you're doing at Fantasy Alarm these days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing everything, honestly. Obviously, we're in week 12, week 13 now of the fantasy football season. So I'm covering a lot of our fantasy football content from a DFS perspective, but also me and my James Grande really head up our NBA DFS content. So we do nightly and daily DFS NBA shows, previewing the slate, getting everybody for roster lock. We're doing DFS playbooks, best bets. We're doing pick'ems for underdog, prize picks, and sleeper. So I got my fingerprints on a lot of things that are happening over on Fantasy Alarm.
It never slows down for you, right? And that's probably a good thing.
It is. It keeps you busy, keeps you active. And, I cover baseball too. And believe it or not, as crazy as it sounds, our early draft guide's coming out like right around the corner. So, the 3-season sports keeps me busy throughout the year.
With baseball, I always think it's interesting too, because it's like right when we're like slipping into playoff fantasy football, we're already getting geared up for early fantasy baseball drafts too, which is always fun. It's a fun thing to do. And you are the guy to go for that. J Impemba 777 on X. And of course, check out all his work at fantasyalarm.com. Now, I always pump up the FFPC Weekly Challenge. We are not going to be doing a weekly challenge lineup tonight because of there's too much to talk about with the Thanksgiving Day games and obviously the Black Friday game with the Chiefs and Raiders this year. So we're not doing that. However, you still can register for the FFPC Weekly Challenge right now at myffpc.com. There is no draft. There is no salary cap. You choose the 10 or 12 players you want and ride them through the weekend's games. Remember, only one player per team. Now, because of the weird setup this week, I do believe if you want to play in the Thursday challenge, you have to have those lineups in by kickoff of the Lions and Bears game. If you want to play in the Sunday game, hey, no problem. Kickoff at 1 p.m. is the lineup lock for that. Enter for $35, enter for $200, whatever you want to do, whatever level you want to play at. Play with 10, 30, or 100 team formats and win up to $2,500. Go to myffpc.com or simply scan the QR code that our producer Matt Deutsch has up on the screen right now, myffpc.com, and play the FFPC Weekly Challenge now. Okay, let's and Henry Muto, by the way, chiming in on YouTube. Congratulations to you, my friend. Number one overall seed in the FFPC Super Bracket Tournament, which is fantastic. Good work, Henry Muto. One of the most talented FFPC players that I know. I've interviewed him multiple times. Awesome guy, very smart, and he's going to be a tough out in that super bracket for sure this week as well. Let's tell you what's coming up on the show tonight. Jon and I are going to go around the NFL, talk a little bit about what happened last night in that Chargers-Ravens game. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on with the backup running back situation heading into Week 13. And then, like I said, we're going to preview all these Thanksgiving and Black Friday games. We're going to talk about the Bears. We're going to talk about the Lions. We're going to get into the Giants and Cowboys. And you say, oh, Balky, how much is there? Well, we're going to talk about Tyrone Tracy. I think Malik Neighbors, it's worth talking about what he got into after this past weekend's game. And then we'll get into that Dolphins-Packers game too. Jalen Waddle, Jonnu Smith, some of the topics that we'll talk about with Miami. And probably no Romeo Dobbs this week. What are you doing with your Packers on Thursday? And then the Raiders-Chiefs game on Black Friday. Certainly a moving situation in both of those teams' backfields. Stuff you got to get right with the FFPC playoffs starting this week in the main event and the Fantasy Pros Championship. That is what's coming up in the first two segments, and we'll do your starts and sits throughout the show, including an entire segment dedicated to starts and sits to close out the show tonight. So let's kick things off with kind of a disappointing night for Diontae Johnson, John. No catches. He only saw one target against the Chargers. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, I wouldn't say either one had great games, but they both had solid games. And Bateman is an interesting guy, too, because a lot of people drafted him to be a number 4, maybe a number 3 receiver for him this year in Carolina. Now he goes to Baltimore. You hold out hopes that he's still going to be a good player with Baltimore, a good fantasy player that you can count on going forward. That doesn't seem to be the case. I think the question that we have to be now asking ourselves, John, with the FFPC roster scheduled to lock here for the non-playoff team shortly and the playoff team shortly thereafter in a couple of weeks, is Diontae Johnson now cuttable? Is he no longer a part of this Ravens offense?
Yeah, I mean, he's barely part of a Ravens offense. He played 9% of the offensive snaps. That was 6 total snaps last night. He maxed out in his debut. He played 17. It's gotten worse pretty much since then. What's your reasoning for keeping him at this point? Maybe Zay Flowers gets hurt and you're hopeful he's almost like a wide receiver handcuff play for you at this point. There's just no value to holding him onto a roster because they seem pretty set in what they're doing. They like their tight ends. Obviously, Rashad Bateman is able to stay healthy this year, which has always been a problem for him in the past few seasons, but he's proven to be a reliable deep threat for them. And yeah, Flowers is their guy. This is also a very run-heavy team. They have Derrick Henry. There's not really a need for that sort of intermediate and underneath passing game that Johnson would sort of excel in. They'll just hand the rock to Derrick Henry and let him barrel through for 6 yards. So, I'm more than happy and willing to cut Diontae at this point.
Scott Colby, a guy who another talented FFPC player, has a question on Tyreek Hill. Scott, I promise we'll get to it in our Dolphins-Packers preview coming up. I want to get to the other games first this week. That happened in week 12 before we get to that. Gus Edwards, John, 9 carries, 11 yards, and a touchdown. And you say, okay, well, that sounds like very Gus Edwardsian. But the thing is, and I think this is interesting because there is a lot of people who picked him up off the waiver wire recently within the last couple of weeks after he came off IR, knowing that Dobbins got hurt and then Edwards still just failed to do any. I mean, he fell into the end zone with the game basically out of reach. Congratulations. But now you look at Gus Edwards, we're always looking for these injury away type guys. Did we get a sneak peek into what the Chargers are going to do if Dobbins is out, not only this week, but maybe misses more time? Did we get a sneak peek into that Gus Edwards simply is just not usable at all?
I mean, listen, he obviously hasn't looked great this year. Then he got hurt, came back. He looked slightly better, obviously, the week prior to this one. I still think that this is more of a tougher spot. He's running up against Baltimore. If you kind of look at the Chargers schedule that they're coming up, maybe there's some easier matchups for him to run against. If you're looking championship week, they're in New England. We know New England can't stop the run. So if Gus Edwards happens to be on championship rosters and Dobbins is still out, he might be a viable flex play that week. But I think given the state of the running back position, you kind of have to throw him out there. It's not like anybody else got any other carries in that backfield either. I was one of those who picked up Gus Edwards as being like, a running back is available that might actually get some work. And I had to start him last week with the bye, so I was happy to get that touchdown that happened. But I mean, if you look at the state again of the waiver wire for the running back position, Mir Abdullah was picked up and started everywhere last week. That's kind of where we're at. I think you almost have to pick up and play Gus Edwards for as long as he is the guy until they show you otherwise.
I think that Edwards, if you have Dobbins, maybe you already had Edwards. If you fell into Edwards off the waiver wire and you already had Dobbins, congratulations to that. I guess my concern is here. You pick up these backup running backs, these injury away type running backs at this point in the season to increase the variance, to make your lineup unique and maybe even you be able to start 4 top 20 running backs on any given week when you're going up against 1,000 plus other teams in the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC main event or whatever. And now Gus Edwards, to me, I guess if you're desperate, yes, it makes perfect sense. But if you have a choice where you're facing maybe like a top 35 or, it comes down to Gus Edwards or maybe a top 30 or top 35 receiver on your team, a top 18 tight end on your team, that's where I think it gets to be more nuanced. And you're like, okay, now I got to look at the matchup here. You mentioned New England. Yeah, that's going to be a good matchup. outside of that, I think you got to get there. And
Yeah.
outside of that, you really got to be questioning it for sure.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, listen, Gus Edwards not huge in the passing game. So you look at like, all right, where can I get my 5 fantasy points maybe this week, 11 if he scores. And then, like you said, you look at the tight ends, and especially in FFPC, you look at the wide receivers where you have that PPR value, easier for them to get you a ceiling performance. And Edwards, knowing that he more than likely is going to need to maybe score twice to really get a ceiling out of that. So I don't disagree. I'm more so looking at it like, if your running back situation is hurt and you got nothing else to go with, then you have to play a guy that you at least is going to think there's guaranteed touches for there at the running back position.
Week 12 and week 14, the Bipocalypse, the Bimageddon weeks, that's warm body weeks. You're just looking for warm bodies to plug in. And Gus Edwards fits that bill.
I started Devin Singletary this week. Can't believe he got a touchdown. Like, I just had nothing else to do. He was the guy that was maybe going to play. Got a rushing touchdown for me. It's all you're looking for.
In one of my dynasty leagues, I had to take Marshawn Lloyd off of IR. So I had to cut somebody. I ended up cutting Devin Singletary. But yet later on in the week, I got to put Marshawn Lloyd back on IR because he went on the NFI list with appendicitis. Right. And so I lost out on Devin Singletary because somebody else scooped him up. But it is what it is. We move on. Let's move on, but not to a different team. Let's keep talking about the Chargers here. Quentin Johnston is a guy that got 5 targets against the Ravens last night. He caught none of them. And one of them was an end zone catch in the second quarter. Now, for whatever reason, he has been very successful at catching touchdowns this year. And we'll get to Nick Westbrook-Ikhine in a little bit. I wonder, and I started him in it's kind of I don't need to get into the minutia with it, but this is a team that's very young that I have in Dynasty, but I happen to have Barkley and Kyron Williams on this team. So they've sort of been carrying me, but my receivers are all like super young and up and coming. Yeah. And I had to start Quentin Johnston this week. And I'm almost wondering, John, and I don't know how much Dynasty you play or how much Dynasty you get into, but Quentin Johnston, I'm almost thinking like, to me, he's still the ceiling and the upside to me is still too high for me to cut him. But I feel like I fell for it this past week in starting him in week 12. And he's kind of like, I don't want to say Devery Henderson, where he's, like a boomer bust guy, but man, did he bust out this week. I just don't know what to think about him anymore.
Yeah, I mean, listen, what you love about him is a snap share, right? Played 80% of the offensive snaps in each of the 2 previous weeks, got 65% this week. He's got a really good quarterback still, Justin Herbert, that can throw the ball downfield. He just is a deep threat guy. It's just his hands are so unreliable. Can you teach better hands? Because I think everything else that he has is pretty elite, right? He's got good body size. He's got the ability to go downfield. He has the ability to get up and like make a contested catch, because we've seen him put his hands on the football. He just can't come down with his hands on the football. So I don't know, in the offseason, just stick him with a jugs machine and just make him catch 100 balls a day. Like, do something. I don't know if you saw my Twitter feed today, but I'm an avid card collector. Yeah. And I pulled a $7 pack out of Target today, and I actually pulled a Quentin Johnston autograph out of there. And I was like, what are the odds? Today of all days, the guy has one of the worst days you can have on a national TV. And they went and gave me his autograph today. So,
but you did get you did get the Jaden Daniels in the same pack, though.
I got the Jaden Daniels.
This wasn't autographed.
Flash. It wasn't an autograph. Nope. Right. Sunburst there from the Panini Prestige collection. But I couldn't believe when I flipped the card over. It's like, I got a QJ auto today. That's what we're doing. So
it happens. It happens. And with Quentin Johnston too, like the one thing so the jugs machine obviously would, I guess, just me being a guy who hasn't played football since high school, I would just assume, he should be doing this all the time. The other thing I would say about Johnston, and this is something that I don't think he's corrected, and maybe never will once he got to the NFL, is separation. He has a lot of these contested catches because he just fails to get separation consistently. I don't know if that's something you could fix. I still think might be something there. But he's got to make hay pretty quick, because this Chargers offense under Jim Harbaugh does not throw it a ton. They have Ladd McConkey, who's kind of obviously taken over as the de facto number 1 receiver there, and they still have Josh Palmer and Will Dissly, who has been great this year. Will Dissly, 4 targets, catches all of them last night for 47 yards in the loss to Baltimore. John, you look at this week. For tight ends. Now, nobody's on bye, which is great, but Will Dissly creeping into the conversation almost to the point where he is a must flex in tight end premium leagues like the FFPC. He goes to Atlanta this week. I'm not seeing any kind of reason to sit Will Dissly in a tight end premium league here this week.
No, you got to love it. Obviously, the 75% offensive snaps for him, so he's on the field enough. The targets are going to be there. He's never going to be like a complete target hog. Again, they don't throw enough, and they have a healthy Ladd McConkey. He had that one double-digit target game, but like you said, tight end premium, if he's going to go ahead and catch 3, 4, 5 passes and maybe find his way into the end zone, for sure, going to play more tight ends in those spots, especially like you said, as a flex play, given what probably your other options are going to be, given the state of the wide receiver running backs right now.
We're talking with Jon Impemba from Fantasy Alarm tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Dietz has a question on X, and I think this is worth bringing up here. He has the opportunity to pick up Brock Purdy in a Superflex league right now. However, it will cost him dropping, not benching, but dropping CJ Stroud. Tua Tagovailoa is his other quarterback. John, what should he do the rest of the way? In a perfect world, who should his top 2 quarterbacks be in this league? Should it be Stroud? Should it be Tagovailoa? Should it be Purdy? Which of those 2 guys would you want, and which one of those are you dropping?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Stroud's been pretty disappointing for most of this year. Now he went a long time without having both of his top wide receivers. Scheduling wise, I mean, again, if you're just if you think you're going to make the playoffs, week 17, Stroud's home versus Baltimore, right? No team is giving up more yards. So if you're just playing championship matchups, that's certainly one to go. Purdy's been the better quarterback all year long. The shoulder injury cost him a week, and now they're saying the shoulder injury isn't really an issue. Do we trust Shanahan to actually tell the truth on that? I certainly don't. So I don't know. I'm always of the like of I don't like to add or trade for injured players. Again, great matchup this week. For Stroud, again, they're going against Jacksonville. Then they have their bye week. So yeah, I probably hang tight with Stroud, honestly. It's pretty close, and the matchups I think for Stroud are favorable more so the rest of the season.
So it's Stroud and Purdy and drop Tagovailoa, or how do you feel about it?
No, I think I would keep Tua. I like what we're seeing on Tua.
Okay, so it's Purdy, Tagovailoa, and you're not making a move and letting Stroud out there.
I know. So should I drop? So he's dropping Stroud to
apparently he can only, and again,
am I reading this wrong?
No. Dietz, if you can offer any exposition on this, it makes it seem like he has to, if he's going to pick up a quarterback, he has to drop a quarterback.
Right.
He's got Tagovailoa, and he's got to make a decision between Stroud and Purdy here.
I would keep Stroud and Tua as my 2 QBs. I would not pick up Purdy.
So leave Purdy out there. Right. Which, I mean, then we can talk about this too. We'll talk about it in a little bit with the Niners. We'll get to it in a second. I do want to bring up, we talk about guys, John, that have just been touchdown machines lately. Mm-hmm. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is the guy. When you look up touchdown machine in the dictionary, there's a picture of him right now. Mm-hmm. Out of his last 7 games, he's got 6 touchdowns. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, I don't know. The only player or the only team he's failed to score a touchdown against was the Chargers. But he got in the end zone against the Colts, the Bills, the Lions, the Patriots, the Vikings, and now this past week against the Titans. Now, the usage is not great. You're looking at never more than 6 targets in a week, never more than 5 catches in a week, never more than 50 yards in a week, except for the 1 week where he had that big 90-some yard or whatever it was, where he got 117 yards this week or that week. None of this is sticky, and yet it seems to keep happening. He gets the Commanders this week. How good of a flex does Nick Westbrook-Ikhine make, knowing that if this dude doesn't get in the end zone, it's a miss? And you say, well, that's an easy sit, but yet he keeps scoring touchdowns, John.
These are a couple of reasons why I like Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I put in a waiver claim for him myself. Number 1, snap share. Last 5 weeks, 92, 97, 185, and 90. He is always on the field for the Tennessee Titans, which means there's always the opportunity for him to get targets, get catches, catch touchdowns, which he's clearly been doing. Now, this is a run-heavy team. They use Tony Pollard a lot, and they throw to Calvin Ridley a lot. And then you go look at their schedule. Washington this week, Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Jacksonville. So their playoff schedule is Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Jacksonville. Can't get much better from a receiver quarterback, pass catching matchup. So Listen, I think you got to pick him up, and I definitely think there's some flex appeal there. The guy does not leave the field, and these matchups are all pretty mint coming up for him.
What would be wild is if somebody wins the Fantasy Pros Championship or the FFPC main event in for the $1 million or whatever,
Yep.
and they have a big week from Westbrook-Ikhine on the team. To the chutzpah to start a guy like Westbrook-Ikhine when you're going for $1 million. That's the kind of stuff.
6 touchdowns. He's got 17 total catches. So like the man is pretty much only catching touchdowns. He might get double-digit touchdowns and not have more than 25 catches on the year. So. Or
maybe the NWIs out there would say he's not getting the ball enough. Look what he's doing, how hyper efficient he is. And I don't know, maybe that's the case too. But they did beat the Texans this past week. Will Levis, I was forced to start in a couple leagues, and he came through as well. So there's something there. I don't know. It all depends on how you like to play fantasy. If you want to live fast and loose and go with this, hey, more power to you. They are playing the Commanders this week, are the Tennessee Titans. And the Commanders have a bad situation in their backfield right now, John. Certainly not desirable for a team that, because of the NFC North, that are kind of in a dogfight for seeding in the NFC playoffs. Yeah. Now, the Commanders earlier this afternoon signed Chris Rodriguez to their active roster. Probably in part because Austin Eckler is in concussion protocol and Brian Robinson is dealing with an ankle injury. Right now, the only healthy back on the roster is Jeremy McNichols. Now, I don't know what's going to happen if both Eckler and Robinson can't go. I don't know if you have any insight into how you think the Commanders are going to deploy these guys against the Titans, who I know started off the season as a really stout rush defense. I don't know how they've been lately.
But no success against them last week, so he could not win the football against them.
Okay, so then your thoughts here on both Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols here in week 13. Is this fool's gold?
I mean, again, I go back to almost the Gus Edwards example is the same thing. Anytime you got any sort of just beating heart of a running back that's going to get touches, I think that you're in a spot, if you're desperate for running backs, you got to kind of pick him up and ride with it. We've seen McNichols have success earlier this year. Now, that was when Eckler was out of the lineup, and he had those couple of back-to-back good weeks there. So, and he was on the active roster for this week, so it seems like he would be the first guy to get opportunities. We've seen Rodriguez get snaps and carries last year and a little bit this year as well. He probably ends up being the backup. It's not a great matchup for sure. Tennessee does not give up much on the ground here. But just as a guy that could go out there and make some plays, McNichols would probably be the one that you would tend to lean on a little bit here. Just not a good spot. Tennessee just has a pretty solid defense. I actually started them in DFS last week as an option. So, people tend to sleep on them, I think, because they're like perception of their like bad offense for whatever reason, but their defense is actually pretty solid. So
the other thing too with McNichols, if you do pick him up and he's available, I should get the ownership percentages in the FFPC main event, which we'll get in a second here. But the other thing with McNichols is if Eckler or not even both of them or Robinson is healthy enough to go next week, I mean, what are we thinking for McNichols? He's not startable, and then after that, you're like, is he even rosterable? If both Eckler and Robinson are healthy, and when you talk about it too, like this week where it's just not a great matchup. I'm totally with you on not having him on your roster. Yeah. I get it if you are in a bad situation where you actually need a running back, but there's no teams on bye this week.
Right.
So that's the thing. So McNichols right now is owned in 22% of FFPC main event leagues. He's owned in 25% of Fantasy Pros Championship leagues. He is out there. Obviously, Rodriguez is mostly unowned in almost all leagues there as well. So that's, again, go with God, but definitely limited upside if you're going to go with McNichols this week.
Yeah, listen, they play Tennessee this week. Then they have a bye in week 14. So, like, to your point, he might be just done, right? Because you think maybe Eckler or Robinson are able to, if they don't play this week, will be good enough in week 15.
And with the FFPC main event and Fantasy Pros Championship, those rosters will lock headed into the championship round in week 15. You won't be able to pick up anybody. Sure. So if you're not using McNichols this week, there is no reason to pick him up because you would think that 2 weeks is enough for Robinson and Eckler to get healthy as well.
Yep.
Corey Walters, thank you for pointing that out, as Jon Impemba just did on YouTube as well. Mr. Grapefruit watching on YouTube. You guys like Tim Patrick this week. If you're desperate, Amon-Ra is a little banged up. Yes, he is. However, bear in mind that I believe the tag he got today was no participation, did not practice, but that was an estimation because they play on Thursday. That could have been yesterday's practice report too. I'd have to look at today's practice report. John, I'm not worried about Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Tim Patrick, again, with nobody on bye, I really think you're grasping at straws.
Yeah, he's far down the pecking order of targets. Now, the snap share, again, is pretty good for him. 50% last week, but 70% the week before that, and over 70% in 3 of the last 5. But, you at most, you're getting the 3 to 4 targets. Then he's got to catch them. So, yeah, probably a no-go for me, unless things get worse. If you start finding out that, Amon-Ra really isn't going to play, because they lost Khalif Raymond, I think, in that game as well. So someone that might have fit better, as an option out there going down, just kind of thins the pool of potential pass catchers in Detroit. So then maybe Tim Patrick becomes more interesting if Amon-Ra isn't able to play. But nah, it's a no-go for me.
Khalif Raymond, did not. They're waiting on a second opinion on his foot injury right now. So I would say that if you have the extra roster spot to play with in the Wednesday night waiver run for the FFPC, sure, pick up Tim Patrick, see what happens. But if we find out Amon-Ra St. Brown is practicing on before, I'm just going to stop talking out of my rear end here and just look up to see what exactly.
I think I saw that he did not play, but it was the Monday practice for Thursday.
Yes, and according to Benjamin Raven today, he was limited. Dan Campbell saying he's feeling good about playing St. Brown this week. Also talking about, because Raymond is going to be out, using St. Brown as the punt returner. And if that's the case, St. Brown's good to go.
Yeah.
So you can pick up Patrick, but I mean, it would be super desperation to play him, even if St. Brown is out. I mean, because you still have Jameson Williams, those 2 running backs, Laporta. I mean, there's so many other options on this team. Okay, let's see what we got here going forward on the YouTube chat. Aaron Jones. Corey Walters wants to know this on YouTube. If Aaron Jones gets hurt the remainder of the season, who is the running back to own? John, I don't know about you, but I got Cam Akers in way too many leagues right now. Not in the hopes, because I never root for player injuries, but knowing the history of Aaron Jones and his soft tissue injuries, knowing it's a long season in the NFL, I do feel pretty good if Jones is ever ruled out in a certain week. Cam Akers is a borderline top 20, maybe even a top 15 running back. So that I've been hoarding him. He's the guy I want.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be the one that definitely gets the carries. He hasn't really fared all that well this year in terms of taking advantage of those opportunities. He had 10 for 25 against Tennessee. Again, tough team to run against with 2.5 yards per carry. Jacksonville just 13 for 38, 2.9 yards per carry. But what's important there is 10 and 13 carries. So if something happens to Aaron Jones, that he's at least a guy that's going to be set up in that backfield. He has the ability to catch some balls out of there, and he knows this offense, going back to when he was with them from last year. So it is certainly the Cam Akers as the handcuff for sure.
He's the cuff, but you I think are a little bit more bearish on that actually using him in your starting lineup than I would be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if he
just because of the performance, right? When he's gotten the opportunity, he hasn't really cashed in on it.
Yeah, he hasn't looked good, but I think again, if you're talking about he is going to be the starting running back for the Minnesota Vikings, I would start him. I think you have to play that.
Yeah, I think that it becomes a situation where if you're that good of a team, and maybe this is in the championship round or something, this probably doesn't come up, but. What if you're in 150th place? What if you're in 200th place for $1 million? You have Cam Akers all of a sudden step into the spot and Jones is hurt. Well, he might be a good guy just to put in there to see what happens to increase variance. You never know how many Cam Akers teams are going to be deploying him. Let's see. Okay. We talk about these injury away type guys here, John. You think about Braylon Allen is a good example. Ray Davis is a good example. Roschon Johnson would probably be a decent example. Jordan Mason, all these guys that are an injury away type guy where if the starting running back goes down, like we just talked about with Cam Akers, does Kenneth Gainwell fall into the territory of a guy who must be owned right now. You look at what Saquon Barkley did this past week, 26 carries, 255 rushing yards. Granted, that was on, 2 big plays, but he still gutted the Rams on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah.
Kenneth Gainwell is available in 20% of FFPC main event leagues. He's available in 40% of Fantasy Pros Championship leagues. 5 carries, 22 yards, and a touchdown against the Rams too. Again, this is in kind of mop-up duty. Does Gainwell qualify to be an injury away type running back that you have to have on your roster?
Yeah, I wouldn't see why not. I mean, he already gets a handful of carries. To me, he is similar to like Justice Hill in a sense where I think if something actually went down with Derrick Henry, you'd see Keaton Mitchell probably step in and be like the lead running back in that offense. But, you'd see Justice Hill still, might become more of a 50-50 share than a full-on workload like Henry's getting now. But I think you probably see Gainwell in the same sense where Gainwell would step in and see a big increase, but you might also see Shipley come in and be a guy that gets some carries as well, kind of behind them. I don't foresee they would just go and give Gainwell the full type of workload that Barkley's getting, but just his overall increase in value for sure. I think there's a path there.
So that's the Gainwell situation. And I think I always go back and forth on him where I'm like, I pick him up, then I drop him. I pick him up, then I drop him. I think that if you are in a situation where, especially if you're the Barkley guy and you're trying to hold the lead, or if you're not a Barkley guy and you're playing against thousands of other teams to try to win $1 million, I think Gainwell is probably worth a roster spot just to see what happens. Let's go with Mile High Luke, the botanical extraction extraordinaire. If Kamani Vidal is active, is he flexible? No, he is not for me, John. I'm not seeing a path for anybody but J.K. Dobbins or maybe Gus Edwards if you're nasty, like we talked about earlier. I think those are the only 2 Chargers running backs I'm looking at.
Yeah, unless they come out today and they say that Dobbins' knee is, torn up again, right? And then they
But even in that case, I think Vidal is rosterable. I don't know if he's flexible at that point.
That's fair.
Let's move on and talk about the fantasy tease among rookie running backs this year. Jonathon Brooks. He makes his long-awaited debut. 11 weeks he misses, and now the 12th week he is in against Kansas City in a game that the Panthers were this close to winning. He gets 2 carries for 7 yards in this game. So obviously if you had Jonathon Brooks on your team, you probably had a higher opinion than most on him at the start of the season. Now do you have to change that opinion of now Brooks is not playable at all unless Hubbard goes down? And even if Hubbard goes down, is Jonathon Brooks the type of guy that the Panthers would be willing to cede 15, 20 touches to on any given week, knowing that they're probably out for the playoffs this season and are already looking forward to 2025. What's the sense of getting Jonathon Brooks hurt again for the remainder of this season? Brooks to me is a guy that, again, even if Hubbard goes down, I don't know how high his ceiling is, John.
What hurt Jonathon Brooks, I think, is the season that Chuba Hubbard is having, right?
Totally. Yeah.
The fact that they even went as far as extending Hubbard when many thought he was the easy trade candidate, at the deadline, so they can open up the snaps for Jonathon Brooks. And then, Hubbard's going to go out there and run for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns this year. Carolina certainly did not expect that production when they drafted Jonathon Brooks, or else they may not have drafted Jonathon Brooks. And now they're in no hurry to give Jonathon Brooks the carries because, like you said, they're not winning these games, right? They're not really in contention for anything. Chuba Hubbard they paid and now carrying the workload. This could just be sort of a red shirt-ish season for Jonathon Brooks because they have no reason to risk another injury to him.
I think that the issue with Brooks is we all saw the upside, right? In drafting season, we all saw what could be, and myself included on some of my teams, John. I haven't cut him because I wanted to keep him around, and now I know that he's never going to be a flex-worthy guy unless Hubbard goes down, and even then, I think we, like you're saying, I think we got to definitely temper expectations for this player here the remainder of the season. Now in Dynasty, that's another conversation because even with the Hubbard contract extension, I still think it's a 2-back league, and Brooks could still be flex worthy when Hubbard is healthy next year. And then if Hubbard goes down, boom, all of a sudden you might have something with
feel way better about Brooks going into next year, full healthy training camp and all of the all of that there. I think they'll give him an opportunity to be more part of the offense. I was one of those that drafted. I was like, I'll stash him. He'll be back in like week 6. Like, this will be great. And then Chuba was 1,000-yard pace running back for the entire season, and they had no reason to give him the touches. So,
let's talk about here, moving on to the 49ers, which we talked a little bit about earlier.
yeah.
Brock Purdy got in some light throwing yesterday, which is good because the dude could barely throw a football last week and obviously did not play against the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. I don't have any further updates than what we heard from Matt Barrows yesterday about Purdy. I'm kind of wondering your thoughts on what we do with Deebo Samuel, a guy who's really struggled over the last month with and without Purdy. What do we do with Jawan Jennings? What do we do with George Kittle? What do we do with the, not McCaffrey because we're playing him, but how much does your outlook change on the 49ers offense for two reasons, or with two things to keep in mind? Number one, Purdy's health, and number two, this is a team that's trending in the wrong direction right now, John.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I didn't think that Braylon Allen was going to look as poor as he did last week. I thought, like, you know what, listen, we got the Shanahan offense surrounded by just a whole lot of great talent around him, and then Brandon Allen did not look good at all, and therefore everybody else outside of Kittle, largely struggled there. Yeah, you kind of have to downgrade everybody if it's not going to be Brock Purdy under center. I'm going to assume that if Brock Purdy is healthy enough, they'll get to start. That he's, you can kind of bump up the value of those receivers again moving forward until they show you kind of otherwise. I don't think they'd be willing to risk Brock Purdy out there at 5-6, outside looking in at a playoff spot if they thought that there was going to be more damage done or the injury is as more severe than it is. So, kind of have to take him at their word as best as he can, knowing the organization isn't great with revealing the actual news regarding their players, but yeah, it is unsettling right now at San Francisco. For sure.
Very unsettling. Do you think the Niners win that division? Just as an aside here, I know it's not really something we get, but I have a lot of futures tied up in the Niners winning the NFC West. I'd love to get your opinion.
No, I mean, right now they're not really trending towards taking that one down. I mean, they're bottom of the division at 5-6, but obviously the leaders are 6-5. I mean, there's a path. I think the Rams probably have a pretty good chance with their offense is starting to click, even though they just obviously didn't look good last week. I don't really believe in Seattle all that much. They have, they're generally a better home team. This year they're not. So maybe a path if Purdy gets healthy, but they're certainly got a ways to go at 1-3 in the division for their head-to-head record, though.
Corey Walters also on YouTube. Let's talk about this aspect. Are you worried if San Francisco falls out of playoff race that they shut down Purdy completely? And that's another thing to keep in mind too. Not that we're talking about cutting Samuel or Jennings or any of these guys, John, but that's something that has to have us worried a little bit about with regards to the Niners offense, because Brandon Allen hadn't thrown a pass since 2022, and it kind of showed on Sunday. Like, just the way he operated in the pocket. No Trent Williams, so I will give Brandon Allen the benefit of the doubt there. It seemed like the Packers pass rush, which has kind of been muted all season, came a little bit alive in this game. But yeah, I mean, I think that's another thing to consider down the stretch, not just in week 13, but down the stretch, how we feel about these Niners skill position players.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a chance. I don't know if it would happen until, week 18. Usually these guys will kind of play out. A lot of them have bonus incentives tied around certain things too, and they don't want to sit. So they can make their money. So, maybe if there's a handshake deal that they'll pay him out if they sit him down, then maybe there's some opportunities. I would say CMC is probably more likely to sit down than anybody, just because of what he's been dealing with, this year as it is. And they have, Mason and Garundo to probably, handle the workload. But I don't know. I feel like the wide receivers, tight ends would probably still be good out there unless – until the later weeks of the season.
Joe King doing some joking tonight. Deebo has been shut down all year. We love that comment. Thank you so much, Joe. It's kind of been the truth. And what's funny is, like, you think about the Niners offense going forward into 2025. They inked Brandon Ayuk to a hefty contract. They invested significant draft capital into Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah.
God, Deebo Samuel in a dynasty league. FFPC dynasty trade deadline's passed, but I wonder if now's the time to get out on him, John.
I mean, there were rumors, obviously, in the offseason that they were looking to move Ayuk or Samuel. They ended up not moving either of them. So I have to assume, based on the fact that they paid Ayuk the money and then drafted Pearsall, like you said, that Debo could certainly be the guy that come draft time again, that he is involved in talks. I'm a Patriots fan. There were rumors that Debo Samuel was a guy that the Patriots were potentially looking at acquiring. I wouldn't mind if they revisited that. We could really use some sort of help at the position, help out with Drake May here. So, we'll see what happens. But yeah, it certainly looks like the writing's on the wall. Plus, the ascension of Juwan Jennings this year, proving that he can be a reliable wide receiver in that offense. Someone's got to go. You can't play all four of them.
And Jennings too. I think next year's a contract year for him. So certainly that you have to think long term with him and try to keep this Niners train moving before the window shuts completely on it too. Josh Downs, Ian Rapoport told us this yesterday morning. Josh Downs is considered week to week and a quote long shot to play in week 13 against your New England Patriots, John. Now, he had the shoulder injury. He played through it against Detroit this past week. He is probably not going to play this week. 53 catches on the season, just under 600 yards. He's gotten in the end zone 4 times. And the Colts, again, have a week 14 bye. So they could get him the extra rest this week. Right. If that's the case for Downs and he doesn't play this week, who are we looking at from Indianapolis? Is Alec Pierce flexible? Is Pittman like a wide receiver 2 this week? How do you view the Colts receivers if Josh Downs misses?
I mean, I'm not really a big fan of Pittman. You assume he draws the Christian Gonzalez coverage. And if you look at the numbers, as poor as the Patriots defense played last week, and Jalen Waddle had a big week and Tyreek Hill was pretty good. If you looked at what it was, the individual coverage numbers, Gonzalez didn't really give up anything. It was all the other cornerbacks that were getting torched there. So, on the outside, if they put Christian Gonzalez on Michael Pittman, who's been kind of gimpy as it is this season, though we did come through last week, got a pretty solid time there. Probably Alec Pierce, maybe Adonai Mitchell steps up here a little bit more. But the Patriots' inability to stop the run, I think, is going to be their big problem in this matchup against the Colts. Could be a big Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson just doing the PRO, against them all weekend. And maybe the wide receivers aren't even really that heavily involved in the game plan.
John, Scott Colby brought something up on YouTube tonight that I hadn't really thought about. Look at the first-round receivers, and I'm looking at the first-round receivers in the FFPC main event at the time the draft started and at the time the season started and when the drafts ended. Look at the first-round receivers. Outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown and A.J. Brown, what receivers have come through for owners? Well, you look at the other receivers that went in the first round. CeeDee Lamb obviously ran into a brick wall with Dak Prescott getting hurt. Sure. And maybe he'll make it through, maybe he won't. Tyreek Hill obviously suffered through injuries of his own, and Tua Tagovailoa. Justin Jefferson, my God, 1 catch for 8 yards or whatever it was into the fourth quarter against the Bears.
Jalen Johnson's no joke. I was trying to tell people that that worried me a little bit, that matchup.
Now, Jamar Chase has come through. He was a 110 pick, so I'll give him that. Garrett Wilson, so he's been okay. He's had a couple of spike weeks, but by and large, if you spent a first-round pick on him, you probably haven't been happy. But the other first-round picks, so I mentioned all those first-rounders for receivers. The other first-round picks, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley's been the only running back that has hit this year. Yeah, I think the strategy for next year, just trade your first round pick. Don't even mess around with it. Let somebody else make them. Stack up in the second round. Get guys like Cooper Kupp. Get guys like Achane. I'm trying to think who are some of the other guys here that have hit.
Derrick Henry, obviously.
Derrick Henry is a good one. Trey McBride, FFPC, tight end premium scoring. Let's see here. Kyron Williams is another good guy. You go down the board here. I guess I don't know. Maybe there are some busts here because I look at a lot of empty fantasy. Isaiah Likely and Travis Kelce has had some empty stats this year. Travis Etienne. So maybe the first 3 rounds are all busts. Who's been good in fantasy? I don't know.
Honestly, it's. I was fortunate. Again, I was kind of bullish on Jacobs and Barkley this year. Mm-hmm. So, I did grab a lot of them where I could, especially
James Cook is another one that I think has been pretty solid.
Cook's been great. I was worried a little bit about Josh Allen in the running and the rushing touchdowns that maybe he was going to take away. But Cook's been really good. They've kind of leaned more on him running the football than Allen this season.
Maybe more so than ever when we look back at the last draft boards before the season started compared to how the teams or how the players ended up might be the biggest disparity ever. So we will put our trust More so than we ever had before, into fantasy analysts like Jon Impemba from fantasyalarm.com to help us guide the way through 2025 drafts next year. He's going to help us guide the way. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to get through all the Thanksgiving Day games, the Black Friday game between Kansas City and Las Vegas. There's a lot of interesting things, moving pieces here. The Bears wide receivers. Sam Laporta, is he a bench this week? Are you starting Luke Schoonmaker over Sam Laporta this week? Those questions answered and more. Jon Impemba joining me here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this.
We're telling ourselves happy stories about players we want to pick, less happy stories about players we don't want to pick. And part of that is being ready to abandon our own carefully crafted narratives when it's time to abandon them, right? Like, bail, this was not working, So like we come in with super hard opinions, and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. The better fantasy players are the people who acknowledge quickly that, hey, this isn't working out. Doesn't mean you have to abandon a player, but it means you have to abandon the approach, and maybe you have to go with a different player. I mean, if people were playing Stephon Diggs last year down the stretch, they were only playing him because his name is Stephon Diggs. You have to be ready to acknowledge, hey, this guy's not getting the job done. I did it. Bloom and I had a big discussion about this last December, and I'm saying you can't play him right now, right? And I know that's a hard decision to make, because why? FOMO. We're going to miss out on that big game. The minute I sit this guy down, he's going to have the big game. Well, maybe. But also, while he is not having great games, there are other guys on your roster having great games. And I think that's to me, the hardest thing about fantasy is like, when do I divorce myself from my narrative? When do I tell when do I acknowledge my happy story is not coming true? I need to figure something else out. And the people who are good at that are the people who are good at fantasy football.
Something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like an Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people want. You can also trade 2 for 1.
We're going to be trading 2 for 1 here. Well, not exactly, because we're not doing a show on Thursday, but we will do a special show, which we're doing right now on the Better Sports Network. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the FFPC. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Jon Impemba from the Fantasy Alarm website, fantasyalarm.com, Fantasy Alarm on the X. We are going to preview the Thanksgiving and Black Friday games right now. Now, if you want to play in the FFPC Weekly Challenge, you can do so at myffpc.com and utilize some of the players we're going to be talking about in this segment. The Lions, the Bears, the Cowboys, the Giants, Dolphins, Packers, Chiefs, Raiders. You can do, well, not the Chiefs and Raiders, but those other ones, you have to be locked in by 12:30, I believe, is when the game kicks off on Thursday. So that is when the Weekly Challenge will lock this week for Thursday. But you can still play in the Weekly Challenge for Sunday. Those lock at 1 p.m. Formulate the 10 or 12 player lineup that you want. You can play with or without kickers and defenses in a 10, 30, or 100 team format if you want. and just don't duplicate players on the same team. You can't have Mahomes and Kelsey. You can't have Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can't have Caleb Williams and Cole Kmet. Not that saying that you would want to do that, but you couldn't do it. MyFFPC.com is where to go. Win up to $2,500. Enter for as little as $35, or just scan the QR code on the screen that our producer Matt has put up on in front of you tonight. You can scan that and go right to myffpc.com and register for the league right now. By the way, Mile High Luke, John, FA fam for life. So you have a family member here tonight.
Oh yeah, we see Mile High Luke in our chat all the time. So happy to have him in here, popping in with us tonight.
He's the man. He's here every week. Always asks good questions, and certainly much smarter because he's a member of the family as well. Let's get into the Thursday day game. This is always wild for me this week because, and I'm sure, John, it's the same way with you, where you got to squeeze all this content in before kickoff on Thursday. And then you still got to place your own waivers and get your start sits. And the last, I want to say 3 years, my son has gotten old enough where we do a turkey bowl with his friends from school. And it's like a total free for all. This is like 17-on-17 football, like mixing in dads and sons on the same side and on different sides or whatever. And that kicks off at 8:00 Central Time on Thursday morning. And they've one of the dads puts up this lavish tent with a full bar, beer, appetizers like that. And so like the whole first 3 hours, like right up until kickoff, I'm busy getting ready to play in this, or playing in this football game. And then as soon as I'm done, it's over to my folks' house for Thanksgiving dinner and ice packs on my knees, elbows, and everything. So it's Thursday morning is going to be harrowing for me. And it gets worse every year as I get older. But I am excited for the games on Thursday because while these games aren't the greatest for NFL matchups, they are pretty good for fantasy matchups. And a lot of fantasy decisions have to be made. We'll kick things off with Caleb Williams, the quarterback for the Bears, a guy that I think a lot of people spent most of the season saying this guy's a bust because they look at what Jaden Daniels has been able to do for the Commanders. Fantasy purposes, he's been a must start in super flex leagues. Single quarterback leagues, I think it ebbs and flows with him. I've started him some weeks, most weeks I have not. Caleb Williams, to me, this screams of a week where I don't want to start him. But in your opinion, is this guy starting to come around? I think they've been victims of bad luck. The Bears have been this year. And I think we might, if the Bears would have squeezed out a couple more of these wins, we might be looking at Caleb Williams in a little bit of a different light right now.
Yeah, listen, I think that there's a story that can be had simply by looking at the offensive line play at some of these teams, with the rookie quarterbacks. You look at Caleb Williams, you look at Drake May, two of the worst offensive lines in football. No surprise. There are times that they don't look good. They've struggled. Their teams have struggled. Bo Nix, Denver Broncos, top 3 offensive line in football. Jaden Daniels, Washington Commanders, top 5 offensive lines in football. If you have an offensive line that can protect the young quarterback, allow them to read the field, develop, and then make plays that they're certainly talented enough to make, they look pretty good. Caleb Williams has suffered behind a bad offensive line. Again, I'm a Patriots fan. They went in there. They had 9 sacks. They haven't had 9 sacks all season until that game, never mind in one game alone. So, I do think he might be coming around. I actually really did like him last week. I wrote him up in our DFS playbook. I was really bullish on him and DJ Moore for DFS purposes, and they came through in that matchup against Minnesota. Now, you can throw the ball on the Lions. My problem, again, is the Lions also have a really good pass rush. So they're going to have enough time for Caleb Williams to get back there, read the field, hit Keenan Allen, hit DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, Rome Odunze to make plays, or is he going to be on his back the whole game? That's where I think there's a risk playing him this week.
Kind of scary to think how good the Lions could be right now if Aiden Hutchinson hadn't have broken his leg. A guy who's probably
too,
Well, I mean, in Hutchinson, I mean, that guy was a contender for Defensive Player of the Year, the way that he was going. And the Lions have not missed a beat. 9-1 or whatever. Are they 10-1 on the season now? I think something like that. It's
9 straight wins, I think it was, right?
I mean, like, maybe Hutchinson, total wasted draft pick. Look what they're doing without him. They should have spent it elsewhere. I don't know. Jon Johnson, I don't want to necessarily say, hey, we need to look at flexing him out on Thursday, because it's not a great matchup, negative game script, and B, he's still well behind DeAndre Swift. The question here is, Jon Johnson gets in the end zone again this past week. He also caught a pass. Is DeAndre Swift now, because of the presence of Johnson, are you breaking ties in your lineups against Swift, knowing that Johnson is starting to play a bigger role on this team, specifically inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you hate any sort of vulture situation because you see Swift on the field and he's still 2-1 outpacing him in terms of snap share and overall touches. But it's when those touches are coming for Roschon, which is frustrating if you're someone that has DeAndre Swift on your roster. So I'm not cutting ties, or I'm not really overly concerned, in terms of not putting Swift in my lineup because Roschon is getting 2 or 3 carries inside the 5. Because the overall volume is still there. Swift is still a very big part of their passing offense as well. So, I don't think I could ever confidently put Roschon Johnson in my lineup because he's just
unless Swift is down. Then you could look at him as a flex. Okay, keep going.
100%. Yep, that's how I feel. Unless he goes down, you can play him. Other than that, you're banking on maybe 5 carries on a good day and hoping he finds his way to a touchdown.
The other thing I want to bring up with the Bears, and you talked about how you were high on DJ Moore last week for DFS purposes. I want to ask you a little bit about just not only him, but sort of the Bears wide receivers in general. And we could throw Cole Kmet in this as well. Cole Kmet last week, 10 targets. He catches 7 of them for 64 yards. And you say, wow, he had to be the leading receiver. Well, actually, Rome Odunze also saw 10 targets, 5 for 39 for him. 15 targets for Keenan Allen, 9 for 86. And then DJ Moore, only 7 targets, but he catches all of them for 106 yards. Yeah. He and Keenan Allen both get in the end zone. Again, we go back to going up against Detroit, talking about this pass rush and the effect it's going to have on the Bears. Is the pass rush that's going to force Caleb Williams to get the ball out of his hands quicker more beneficial for a guy like DJ Moore, more beneficial for a guy like Keenan Allen? I also saw a stat. I don't know if this is fantasy points or whoever had it. I can't remember. Maybe it wasn't even them. But that Rome Odunze is second in the league in most uncatchable air yards or something like that, which, I mean, doesn't it all surprise me? It stinks that this dude gets 10 targets last week and has 8.9 fantasy points to show for it. And now it's Detroit. Who are you starting? Who should be the starts among the Bears receivers this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a week-to-week standpoint, almost the only one you can confidently play, and even he has been inconsistent times, is DJ Moore still. It was great to see Keenan Allen put up the week that he did last week because we weren't sure if he was even healthy going into that week. There was questions if he was going to play, and then he goes out there and balls out. Same thing like you mentioned, Cole Kmet's been highly inconsistent. I've always felt like a good safety net for a rookie quarterback is their tight end. Hunter Henry's the leading guy in New England. Cole Kmet could have been that guy, but they surrounded him with a lot of top-end talented receivers. It's possible that a quicker pass rush just makes Caleb Williams make quicker decisions, quicker hot routes, easier throws, can move the ball downfield. Again, this is a secondary that teams, at least earlier in the season, were having success throwing the football against. They've certainly tightened it up a little bit of late, but I think, kind of close your eyes and throw a dart and see which receiver it lands on. I'd still probably rank them as more Allen and Odunze if you asked me to do it.
I think, okay, so more Allen Odunze, that's how you would how you'd rank them? Okay. And I think that's the way I would rank them as well. I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, it sounds like Moore is the guy that you trust this week. Allen and Odunze only if you have to, right?
Yeah, I feel like Moore is, again, it's difficult because they've been so inconsistent, but to me, DJ Moore is the best wide receiver on that team. He should be and is their wide receiver 1. The other 2 have had big games at times this year, and they could certainly come out this week and have a big game, but I would put more money on Moore being the consistent play.
Do you, and I'll bring up what Mile High Luke is saying here too. How did DJ Moore's snap rates go from first, essentially, in that offense to last with the new offensive coordinator? Is that too small of a sample size before we rule on DJ Moore with Thomas Brown? He's only had 2 games as the OC so far as Brown.
Well, I mean, he played 99% of the offensive snaps last week. So what exactly is the DJ Moore snap count going down?
He's still up there with snaps, targets, I guess, and maybe targets is a flukier thing when we're only talking about
targets for sure, because I mean that's all about coverages. Teams are gonna put more guys blocking out routes for DJ Moore, and if they're going to throw the ball as many times as they did last week, 47 times, then they're just gonna have that. It's the Cleveland Brown effect. We talked about not to jump targets around with you, but Jameis Winston is throwing the ball 40 plus times a game. Every wide receiver is getting to 8 to 10 targets. So they're gonna look good from a target share volume. It's how effective they can be in those targets. So they were down in that game big where Chicago had to come back against Minnesota, had the big fourth quarter there where a lot of those passes were coming from Caleb Williams. So an inflated pass attempts is going to lead to a lot of targets for the wide receivers.
Yeah, and Caleb Williams last week, obviously 32, 47, 340 yards. I don't know. I don't have it in front of me. That might have been his most attempts on the season. I'm assuming it was. Yeah. I don't know for sure. But
he might have had one other week of 40, I think.
But it was right up there, regardless.
Yeah, 40. Yeah. He had a 52 attempt week against the Colts in week 3, and then he had a 41 attempt 2 weeks ago against Arizona.
Yeah, I forgot about the 52. I totally forgot about that. I'll tell you another guy who's watching us on YouTube tonight. It is Corey Walters, who we have already gone back and talked about a few of his comments. I'm going to bring this one up, dynasty standpoint here. Can we finally agree that Ja'Marr Chase is the number 1 wide receiver in dynasty over Justin Jefferson? Even though he's a Vikings fan, he's connected with Burrow, and he's been saying this for the last 2 years. I still liked Justin Jefferson over Ja'Marr Chase for dynasty. And maybe, I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't know what's going to happen with either one of these players' situations for 2025, which muddies the waters, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know who the quarterback in Minnesota is going to be next year. And I don't know if Ja'Marr Chase is going to be in Cincinnati next year. I mean, he's still looking to get paid. And if it remains consistent in Cincinnati, I love the Burrow Chase connection enough to put Chase as my number 1 dynasty wide receiver. But it's just this nebulous nature of the NFL, John, that has me worried about Jefferson versus Chase here. I don't know which way I fall in on this.
I mean, it's Jefferson feels like the more week to week consistent play, but you certainly get, I feel like, more boom weeks out of Ja'Marr Chase, right? Like, Jefferson has had big games, but we had the 260-yard game from Ja'Marr Chase, and I feel like we get that like once a year. He goes out there and just shatters everything, has 3 touchdowns, adds over 200 yards receiving. Joe Burrow has had his fair share of injury issues so far. He's been hit around. He had the wrist, which he himself is still, you always see him out there flexing the wrist, and who knows when that's fully going to be healthy. He's had the knee. So I'm not going to say he's injury prone, but he's a guy that's been prone to injury so far. Yeah. In the first couple of years of his career. They're both elite wide receivers. I don't think you would go wrong keeping either of them as your wide receiver 1 in dynasty. And we don't know what J.J. McCarthy is going to look like. So far, almost all the rookie quarterbacks that have played have shown the ability this year to play. Maybe J.J. McCarthy can also just play. Those quarterbacks are looking pretty good. And if that ends up being the case, I would have no problems keeping Justin Jefferson if McCarthy ends up being the guy. I
still think there's a non-zero chance Aaron Rodgers ends up in Minnesota next year too. It's not a good chance, but a non-zero one. For
any organization that lets Aaron Rodgers play for them next year just knows that they're signing their own death ticket. So.
Unless you're the Montreal Alouettes or the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, that'd be a Rodgers.
Let him go away. Yeah, I thought he was done playing football a couple of years ago, and it seemed like he quit. And he's gone in and imploded a Jets franchise, and he's on his way out there. I think he was on the show today saying he's not even sure he wants to play next year. So
yeah, he did say on Pat McAfee today. He said, he's like, I don't know if I'm gonna play next year, but my first choice would be the Jets. Okay, well,
they ain't your choice. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Dylan Fink on YouTube tonight. He's prepping for his Week 14 bye without the Ravens and specifically Lamar Jackson. He needs to grab a quarterback in advance. He has the roster spot to do it this week. Should he be going with Sam Darnold at home against the Falcons, Derek Carr at the New York Giants, or Will Levis at home against Jacksonville? I kind of like all 3 of those matchups. I'm seeing a higher ceiling, or maybe the highest ceiling, with Sam Darnold. I would say Darnold here is the play.
I have that exact situation in the league that I'm in. I have Lamar Jackson, and my backup quarterback for that specific week drafted it to be is Sam Darnold. So I'm going to go with Darnold there as well.
Corey Walters also chiming in. Does Michael Penix Jr. play this year for Atlanta? Any chance he starts next year? Yes, there is a chance he starts next year. Yeah. Do I think he plays this year? Not so much. Yeah. I do have him in one dynasty league, a non-super flex league. And every time I look at waivers throughout the season in that league every week, I'm like, God, I should cut Penix. But I have Cousins in that league. Yeah. So I figure I'll keep him around as long as I got the roster spot. The team's doing okay. But Penix, I think, is going to be very exciting at some point, probably in 2025. In 2024, I'm not seeing anything, John.
Yeah, I don't think so. You'll see him there. I mean, it'd be kind of wild for them to give the deal they gave to Cousins and then sit him in the second year or trade him. I guess they would have to move on from him. They couldn't. Yeah. They wouldn't be able to keep him as the backup there. So we'll see. I mean, they obviously invested the draft pick I have, nobody expected Michael Penix to go to Atlanta in that draft. They kind of threw everybody, including their own draft room, for a little bit of a loop if you read the reports there. So it all depends on how invested they're going to be. But I mean, they've had a pretty good year, kind of all things considered. Things are finally starting to click, for that offense as well with Cousins. So I know it would feel very interesting to me if they just made that switch right away.
And the most frustrating thing for me is we don't have anything, like there's no rubric for this. We don't have a track record. Michael Penix, who played, I don't have my figures in front of me, but I think like 17 years of college football.
I was going to say, he's like 35.
Yeah, exactly.
Who retires first,
So then it's a case of like, okay, well, Penix can play right away. Well, they just signed Cousins to this big deal, so they don't really have any urgency to play him right away. So I don't know. Like,
if they win the division with Cousins, are they really going to move on from him just to start Penix? I can't see that.
It would take a Aaron Rodgers-esque implosion for Kirk Cousins next year for Penix to see the field with any meaningful fantasy playing time, is what we're talking about here. So yeah, definitely not in 2024, maybe in 2025. Although, as you said, John, I guess I'm probably against that as well. Getting back to this Bears-Lions game, Jared Goff is taking on, in my opinion, an underrated Bears pass defense. John, is the offense for the Lions just too good? And you say, listen, Goff is just going to put up numbers no matter who he plays against. So for me, he's kind of a borderline start this week, but I could see the case where you might want to start somebody else over, like Bo Nix or Justin Herbert or somebody like that.
I think that Detroit is going to run all over this defense. We just saw Aaron Jones just
run with Gibbs and Montgomery, So then Goff might be a sit for you. Right?
Yeah, I'm not very high on Jared Goff this week. Again, Jalen Johnson, we just saw what he did to Justin Jefferson. He is a tier A cornerback in the NFL. He is going to take out the number one wide receiver on pretty much any team that he's going up against. And Aaron Jones just ran all over this Chicago Bears defense. And now you're going to go up against two of one of the better, maybe the best running back tandem duo in the entire NFL in Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. It was funny. I was actually talking to Andrew Cooper last night about, last year on the app, there was a lot of hate on Jahmyr Gibbs and the selection that the Lions made. I was, kind of bullish on, sort of harkening back to the Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram season that we had all those ways back when they were both top 10 running backs. That ended up coming through last year with the way Gibbs had. And now we're looking at Gibbs here again. Both guys have double-digit rushing touchdowns. They're both looking like they're going to trend over 1,000 yards. I think this is just going to be a ground and pound game for Detroit. Both running backs obviously are startable every single week anyways, but I would almost think you're going to see ceiling performances like we just saw from them this last week, where everybody again thought, oh, Goff lit up Jacksonville. It's going to be another week where the Goff goes and has a big week and the running backs just did all the damage.
So maybe this answers my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Sam Laporta, you're down on Goff this week. Sam Laporta, granted, in the last 2 weeks, has seen 6 targets in each game. He's only caught half of them. I'm going to read just now he's gotten in the end zone 3 times this year. But if you go back and look at Laporta this year, 3 for 19, 3 for 66, 2 for 28, 6 for 48, 1 for 25. 1 for 52, 4 for 53, 2 for 36, 2 for 13, 4 for 45. This is going to come off bad and me trashing Sam Laporta, but I guess what I'm trashing is this guy's fantasy ADP this year, I think was based a lot about what he did in the end zone last year and how many touchdowns he got. Yeah. And this shouldn't come as all that big of a surprise to us to see that, oh, maybe this guy is not the best tight end in fantasy football. Because of all the other weapons they have in Detroit, or maybe he was punching above his weight last year. But now you look at this week against Chicago, you're already down on Goff. Yeah. Even in tight end premium leagues, we have to have a conversation, John, about maybe Laporta's best left on the bench this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened last year was also like there was no Jameson Williams. Like they didn't really have a number 2 wide receiver on that team to help out with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Laporta was able to step in and be that guy. And with him being a kind of a rookie tight end. Teams weren't necessarily scheming for him early because they didn't know necessarily what to expect, and he was able to take advantage of some of those matchups. Last week, TJ Hawkinson did have a big game against Chicago, and again, I think a lot of that came because they just couldn't throw the football to Justin Jefferson there. Chicago generally has been pretty good against tight ends, but that's also kind of a DVP stat that's hard to really quantify because there's only so many teams in the NFL that actually use a tight end primarily in their offense. So we could see Sam Laporta come out and actually have a decent week just because he can't throw to St. Brown or Jameson Williams because Jalen Johnson's the one getting shut down on that side here. So I'm not like completely fading him. Again, it's a state of the tight end position too. Like, what else do you have to throw out there if it's not Sam Laporta? So I'm fine starting him, and maybe some of those targets that may go to one of the wide receivers doesn't go there this week because Jalen Johnson's on the other side.
Let's that'll wrap up our Bears Lions coverage. We'll get into the Giants and Cowboys in a second. I want to go to Jordan Green's question on YouTube right now. He has to start two of these four receivers: Tyreek Hill against the Packers, T. Higgins against the Steelers, Brian Thomas Jr., who's going up against the Texans, or DJ Moore, who is playing against the Lions on Thanksgiving in Detroit. John, for me, I look at this. I'm playing Hill and I'm playing Higgins. I'm sitting Thomas and I'm sitting Moore.
I'm not going to play Thomas even with Trevor Lawrence potentially back this week. I'm not going to trust that Jacksonville offense to do much of anything here. Higgins versus Steelers at home, but they're off a bye is not bad. I think I would go. You said Tyreek and Higgins. I think I'd probably agree with you on that.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the way I would roll.
Yeah.
And Jordan, maybe you're thinking the same thing, but that's how we'd roll on this. Mile High Luke, FFPC tight end premium scoring. This is a fun one. Hunter Henry or Kyle Pitts. He has that decision to make this week. Now, Mile High, I would say try to get them both in your lineup and tight end premium scoring. But if you can't, I get it. Hunter Henry, 5 for 44 this past week against the Dolphins, 6 for 63 before that. Then you had the clunker against the Bears, 1 for 14, but then 7 for 56, 5 for 45, 8 for 92. This is all what we're looking for in tight end premium scoring. I actually lean towards Hunter Henry this week, who is going up against the Colts, as opposed to Kyle Pitts, who's at home against the Chargers. And Kyle Pitts is a guy who 2 of his last 3 games, a single catch. I'm just seeing higher volume from a reception standpoint with Hunter Henry, which is why I say Henry over Pitts this week.
Colts are allowing the second most catches this season to the tight end position. Fantasy points wise, they're allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position there as well. So I'm fine going there again. This is a game where people actually think the Patriots could be rather competitive in. So and he does have he is essentially the number 1 target in this Patriots offense. So I am perfectly good with Hunter Henry here.
Let's bring this up right now too. Fantasy Pros Championship from Gilherm Ralish, who is watching on YouTube right now. Same question, kind of. Instead of Kyle Pitts, it's David Njoku. David Njoku or Hunter Henry. He is not planning on flexing out the second one. When it comes to being a decision between Njoku or Henry, this time I think I lean Njoku here. Your thoughts? Yeah,
still going to go Njoku again. Just the pass volume you're getting out of Jameis Winston right now, it just is too hard to kind of ignore. Denver, against tight ends, they're fine. They're nothing spectacular, historically. So I'm good going Njoku as a top target in that Browns offense.
Let's get into the Giants and Cowboys, the second game on tap, the middle game on tap for the Thanksgiving weekend here on Thursday. I'll kick things off with Tyrone Tracy, who is going up against the Dallas rush defense this week. I think you break ties in favor of Tyrone Tracy this week. I still happen to like him as a second wide receiver in full PPR leagues. I don't know how you feel about him. I just feel like Singletary touchdown aside, this guy has cemented himself as the number 1 running back there. And I know that the Dallas defense can be good. I don't know if they're going to be good enough to keep Tracy from like a 15 or maybe even a 20-point week this week.
Yeah, they can't stop the run. Their pass rush is obviously improving, which is helping their pass defense a little bit more over the last few weeks. But even then, I'm with you there. I think they're just going to hand the ball off a ton. I think both running backs are probably going to get some work this week. I think it's just the safer way for the Giants to try to compete in this game. I'd like to know what's going on with Tommy DeVito there. It seems like that arm is going to be a problem for him. I think was the last report I saw about that. So you could see, gonna see Drew Lock possibly, and I think that could even be better for this offense. My belief was always sort of that Lock was going to be the guy that played this week and moving forward. This was more of a contract situation where they owed Lock a bunch of money if he played 40 or 50% of the offensive snaps. And with him not playing last week, he's now going to be under those thresholds for the rest of the season. So they don't have to pay him out his snap count bonuses, which is cheap for an organization to do. But Wouldn't shock me now if Locke's the guy. I'm in on the Tracy play though. I think he's a pretty elite spot this week.
So to your point on Drew Lock potentially coming in, Pat Leonard, who covers the Giants for the New York Daily News, posted on Sunday afternoon, posted a fantastic selection on X about what Malik Neighbors said. And I'm not going to paraphrase.
It was crazy.
So he said, yeah. So Neighbors said, quote, "I'm tired of going out there and losing." They asked him about the performance on the Giants today. He said soft as F, only to borrow a line from Christmas Story. He didn't say F.
Right.
He said he was asked about his day. Quote, "Go out there first, second quarter, don't get the ball, start getting targets at the end. I mean, I can't do nothing. Start getting the ball when it's 30-0. What do you want me to do?" Then he was asked, well, why didn't you get the ball in the first half? I don't know. Talk to Dabbs about that. Talk to Dabbs, referring to head coach Brian Dable. And then Tommy DeVito in at quarterback this week. How did that change? And he said, I mean, obviously it ain't the quarterback. Same outcome when we had DJ at quarterback. I mean, take a look. It ain't the quarterback. He was asked about the play calling. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I know I'm tired of losing. End quote from Malik Neighbors. Heavy stuff there. Now, when oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes when a player sounds off like this, we see him heavily involved in the game plan the following week. It's usually as a receiver. This is not a question from a season-long perspective, what to do with Malik Neighbors. You got him, you start him. But you think about the FFPC Weekly Challenge or DFS. Does Neighbors make sense as a potential guy who could blow up on Thanksgiving Day in Dallas?
I mean, he is certainly talented enough. It is not a talent problem with the Malik Neighbors. And I agree. It blows my mind. You go back in the days, the Randy ratio, that Mike Tice, put in there. It's like, we win football games and Randy Moss gets X amount of targets, and the top wide receivers, Keyshawn Johnson there would get me the ball, yes, he's your number one pick. He's the most talented wide receiver you have in the team. The fact that you're not devising a game plan to get him involved right away and get him involved as early as possible, because he is as likely to break one. I mean, how many times do we see Jamar Chase take like a 10-yard out and run 70 yards? Like, Neighbors can do the same thing. Why are you not finding ways to get him the football? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Goes to show you why there's just a lot of poor coaching in the league. Goes to show you why the Giants are going to be an organization that's going to cycle through yet another coach and yet another offensive coordinator. It starts at the top there, but it just doesn't make any sense. You would think, number one, your game plan is to get 5 targets a quarter, or whatever it is, 2 targets a drive. The fact that they go drives without targeting the league Neighbors blows my mind.
That is the Giants side of the Thanksgiving Day against the Cowboys. We're going to get to Dallas in a second. I want to answer a couple more questions here. Mile High Luke wants to know which Cleveland wide receiver is going to draw coverage from Patrick Surtain. I don't have any insight on this. I just know that regardless of Surtain or not, with Judy, with Tillman, with Moore, man, it's kind of roulette with these guys every week. Do you have a strong feeling on any of these guys maybe having or taking a step back in week 13 if Surtain is on them the majority of the game, John?
Yeah, well, so Tillman's in concussion protocol, so we'll see if he actually even ends up suiting up this week or not. My assumption would be Judy would be the guy. I don't think Moore plays on the outside, but I would have to check. I'm not fresh on the lineup situation there for Cleveland and where they line up, but I would imagine Judy's their top receiver. That Surtain would be the guy that would draw that coverage there. And Moore is getting a ton of targets as it is anyways. And if there's no Tillman, again, more likely that he is someone that you could play. So,
Mile High Luke also wants to know, he's in an FFPC Superflex league. Are you starting Jameis Winston or Drew Lock as quarterback too? It's still Winston. I mean, we just don't know what's happening with Lock, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to start Drew Lock. I'll take the guy that's going to throw 40 passes, win, lose, or draw there. So.
And even if it's a roster question, I'd much rather have Winston on my roster than Drew Lock for sure. Brett McDonald has an interesting question. This is a full PPR league. He has the opportunity to upgrade at an elite position here. He has a ton of depth, and he'd be trading both Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown for Bijan Robinson. I think he's getting the best player in the deal here, John, but at the same time, I'm not sure it's worth giving up both of those guys to get Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, I'm not going to trade both of those guys. Brown's not coming off the field right now for a pretty good offense, and he himself is being productive. Then what has Josh Jacobs done to make you think that there's honestly that big of a difference between he and Bijan Robinson at this point? Josh Jacobs has had some huge weeks for an offense that's going to score points, that likes to run the football. So I get it. There's pass catching upside for Bijan for sure. He's a guy that can go out there and catch 6 or 7 balls. We've seen it done it, but nah, I'm not trading 2 starting tier A, tier 1B running backs just to get Bijan as a slight upgrade there.
Yeah, 2 top 12 running backs for maybe a top 6 running back, top 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
This is an interesting aspect here going forward here with the Giants and Cowboys as we get back to that. Rico Dowdle this week is kind of a borderline RB2. So maybe you're flexing him out. Is he actually a sleeper this week? And consider the opponent in the Giants and consider how well the Cowboys, did not give up last week, kept fighting and closed out that game in a matchup that they probably should have given up, given where their season's at right now. Dowdle's kind of interesting this week against the Giants.
100% should be in. I mean, once they committed to Rico Dowdle being the guy and they were done with the Dalvin Cook experiment and to some lesser extent giving Elliott the touches that he was getting, you should feel pretty confident there. You love the 19 for 86 last week, season high or second highest total for him. Last time he had that was against Pittsburgh. Against the Giants earlier this year, he had 11 for 46, which is a pretty good, touch carry ratio there, over 4 yards a carry. So, I'm good with it. And, we talked about CeeDee Lamb earlier. Still leads the league in receptions. He's got 77 of them. I mean, they're still throwing to him a ton. He's not going to have 1,500 yards this year. That's going to happen. But, the reason why they keep saying, like, we're going to play Cooper Rush because he gives us the best chance to win, it's because he does. He gives them the best chance to win football games. He's not an incompetent quarterback. Trey Lance runs around there like a chicken with his head cut off. So you're going to see Cooper Rush out there. They're going to move the football, and this is definitely a spot where they can run on New York.
Brandon Cooks has his injured reserve window open right now. Limited practice yesterday, limited practice again today. Is there anything there for getting him into your lineup in week 13, or do we kind of need to see how this thing is going?
Yeah, you need to see how it plays out. He's been gone way too long. They're certainly comfortable with Tolbert there. There's no reason to rush Cooks into their lineup.
Moving on to a player that was rushed into their lineup against their wishes with the Jake Ferguson injury. Yeah. And I think the latest I saw, John, correct me if I'm wrong, it still sounds like Schoonmaker is going to be the guy this week. Yep. Ferguson is not going to be ready. What do you think about him in FFPC leagues as a flex?
I mean, I would play him. I mean, you look at now the 3 games where he's been extended. He's been productive in all 3 of them. The injury that happened there when Ferguson missed in week 2, last week when he was forced into, or 2 weeks ago when he was forced into increased snap share, and then last week when he was forced into a bigger role, he's come through. This is an offense and that I've talked a lot about. I think it's just conducive to productive tight ends. Like Ferguson is a guy, the offensive play calling and game plan, easy throws to the tight end. Dak relies a lot on Jake Ferguson. It's not like Jake Ferguson's this all-world athlete that is uncoverable. He's a slow, space-eating tight end that just finds the soft spots and they make it easy to throw to him. Schoonmaker's kind of the same guy. He's out there, he finds the spots, and Cooper Rush is able to hit him. So I would certainly be starting him this week against the Giants.
Super down on the Cowboys after week 11, after week 12. I have a lot of confidence in them for sure going forward here. Let's get into the Dolphins and Packers game, a game in which I'll be attending. So I have to gobble up my turkey fast on Thursday before I travel up the 25-minute drive it is to Lambeau Field to take in Miami and Green Bay. And I think this is an interesting game for not only for real life purposes, fantasy purposes. My God, there's no shortage of storylines in this game. I'll kick it off with the quarterbacks. You have Jordan Love. You have Tua Tagovailoa. Which one are you playing this game at Lambeau Field, John?
I think I'm going to go with Love. Honestly, it's going to be cold. I hope you're warm. I hope you bring the warm.
Oh yeah, we're good. Game. Yeah, I'm a season ticket holder for the Packers, and I could tell you there is no shortage of layers, longies, and hand warmers and foot warmers at my disposal here. So I'm bringing my son. How weird is this? So this will be my son. He's 11 years old. This will be his 3rd Packer game. His first Packers game, Christmas Day, when Baker Mayfield almost beat the Packers after throwing 4 picks. Second Packers game, they destroyed the Minnesota Vikings on New Year's Day, and now his 3rd Packers game on Thanksgiving Day. All the holidays. It's not going to be a holiday for him going forward unless he goes to a Packers game. Yeah. It's going to be cold, and I was bringing this up on my local radio show today. While the Packers are the youngest team in the league, the Dolphins are technically the oldest team in the league. They have 6 players. I think it's 6 or 8. I can't remember of players on their team that are significant contributors on both on offense and defense that are age 30 or older. Yeah. Short week, cold weather, old team, How much does that play into this when we're figuring out Packers and Dolphins?
I think it does. You got a warm weather team going up that's going to be playing in below freezing conditions here on a short week, like you said. I am not very high on the Dolphins offense here this week. I know we mentioned earlier Tyreek Hill play. I think that was just more so the options that we were kind of given in that four-man situation there. But it's not going to be easy. I think this is going to be, again, a kind of a slow, grinding game. But I'll have more faith, I think, in the Packers at home this week than I would with the Miami Dolphins in this offense.
I still think you play Tyreek Hill. Scott Kobe was asking about him before. I still think you play him. In the leagues I have Tyreek Hill, I'm still deploying him. You know who's interesting and who's been interesting as of late has been Jalen Waddle. Dude gets 8 catches for 144 yards and a touchdown against the Patriots this past week. And I'm kind of wondering, like, for the majority of the season, when Tagovailoa was not the majority of the season, but the weeks where Tagovailoa was hurt, you were basically sitting Waddle. And then even when Tagovailoa came back, you could still make the case that Waddle's a sit. Have we turned the corner now? Is Waddle once again in our good graces as a borderline top 20 receiver?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're playing him no matter what, I think, coming off of last week. And he was one of the bigger disappointments, obviously, this season. The offense itself has had its troubles, like you mentioned, no Tua. When I did my wide receiver rankings earlier this year, I had him inside the top 12. I thought he was a sleeper that you could grab later in drafts that had tremendous upside, based off of the fact that Tua was on pace and led the league in passing yardage. Thought this offense was going to throw. I wasn't really concerned with Tyreek. We got the 1,300 yards or whatever it was from Waddle. I'm like, full systems go. Then Tyreek gets hurt. The offense has kind of struggled ever since. And then, like you said, he came back and he wasn't involved. And I was like, well, maybe he's not healthy because he's had a lot of injury issues himself. Super encouraged by what we saw because he's a guy that, while Tyreek's going deep and the defense is worried about it, Waddle's a guy going across the middle of the field. He's kind of getting those underneath passes, and he's fast. He can take that ball in short yardage and make it into big plays. So, I would be more into him this week, I think, than Tyreek if I was picking between the two. But playing them both, I think you got to put them in your lineup.
Moving forward, Jonnu Smith is a guy who has been on fire the last month or so. I want to do a callback to something we talked about earlier in the show, and Sam Laporta at tight end. What if you had a decision between those guys? I'm a weak man, but even me being a weak man, John, I think I can comfortably start Jonnu Smith over Sam Laporta this week.
Yeah, I don't think it's a terrible, some of the Waddle struggles could be the fact that Jonnu Smith's the one that's getting those passes, right? Yeah. Like there's the defenses are focusing in on Waddle, and Jonnu's kind of left to his own devices there. It was never really again a talent issue. It's been more of a usage issue with Jonnu Smith over the course of his career. We were frustrated with his usage last year in Atlanta because he was playing over Kyle Pitts. We're like, what is going on? Why is Jonnu Smith making all these plays? And then McDaniel scoops him up, puts him right into his offense, and hey, look at this. We're getting a tight end one season out of Jonnu Smith. So I am fine starting Jonnu this week.
I want to talk about the Packers side of this from the standpoint of Romeo Doubs. Being a concussion protocol, be a miracle if he's cleared in time for this Thursday game. So I'm assuming he's out. I don't want to necessarily talk about Jaden Reed because I don't think his role really changes all that much if Doubs is out. But what about Christian Watson? What about Dontavian Wicks? Do either of these guys seem more startable to you against the Dolphins this week, assuming Doubs is out?
I mean, I think you play them both. Watson, to me, is another guy. You want to talk QJ earlier with the drops. I mean, how many balls is Christian Watson going to drop that are just right in his breadbasket?
Yeah.
Super frustrating to see that. I was, again, very bullish on him this year. I've been in a lot of best ball leagues. So that touchdown would have been pretty cool to see. But Wicks is a guy that gets on the field, and when he's given the increased opportunities, Jordan Love does look for him. So, I think there's that. I also think that this week Kraft could be a pretty sneaky play without Romeo Doubs. We see him tend to step up when they're missing a wide receiver and someone that could come through and be productive this week.
Yeah, Tucker Kraft this past week against the Niners, he does get in the end zone, only 2 catches for 26 yards, puts up the bagel against the Bears the previous week. But then he's been pretty consistent, at least 3 or 4 catches pretty much every week from week 4 on. So there's something to be said. And you are breaking ties in favor of Tucker Kraft this week.
Yeah. Yep.
Moving on to the Black Friday game. AOC, the other AOC, is probably going to be starting at quarterback this week with Gardner Minshew out for the season. Does that change how you feel about Jacoby Myers or Brock Bowers at all?
No, those guys are going to get their boatload of targets. They're the only 2 guys on that team you really can throw the football to. And I didn't really find there to be a talent differential between Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew anyway. So it all works out.
All right. So then the next question that we have to bring up here, John, is the Vegas Raiders running back situation.
Sure.
The latest we have seen is oh God, I should have this and I don't have it. I don't know what's going on. I know I was talking with another FFPC player this week, earlier today, and he said this week he thinks it's going to be another Amir Abdullah start. And if that's the case, okay, I can see flexing him out. But I guess this kind of depends upon Zamir White's health. This kind of depends upon, Dylan Lobby. Is Dylan Lobby still a thing? I don't think in redraft leagues, right?
No, it would be Abdullah if everybody is out again. I'm trying to find myself to see if we have any updates on those guys here. Looks like they're both considered questionable, but more unquestionable than positive questionable. It looks like.
And like when it's close like this in a situation like this where you have to make a decision on Friday as opposed to Sunday, I tend to not mess around with kind of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If everybody's out and it's Abdullah and Lobby again, then yeah, Abdullah I'll flex out. But if anything else, no, I'm not messing around with Madison and White and all those guys. Okay, so that's the Raiders. The Chiefs, this running back situation is a little bit more tenuous. Now, I got a report, and I'm trying to find out so I can attribute it. Right before we went on air, about a little bit less than an hour, Charles Goldman had this report on X. Matt Nagy said that he is going to determine the workload between Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt in the game. So now Pacheco did not return last week, but it sounds like he is going to be taken off IR, and he will be in the game this week. Nagy was talking about Pacheco like this, quote, "The best part about that is you just don't have one where they're going to get worn down by the time you get to the fourth quarter." Now, this is horrible for people who have Pacheco and people who have Kareem Hunt. I, quite frankly, have not made up my mind on what to do, given that this is a Friday game. Let's explore all scenarios here. Let's assume Pacheco doesn't come back, which I think is highly unlikely at this point. Then you're playing Kareem Hunt. In the most likeliest scenario, or the most likely scenario, I should say, Pacheco and Hunt are both active. What are we doing here, John?
Yeah, I mean, I would be very surprised if Pacheco came back and then played like 70% of the offensive snaps. It wouldn't shock me more so if this is like a 60-40 split. But what I could envision happening is more how Kareem Hunt was used with the Cleveland Browns as that change of pace, third down pass catching style back. And Pacheco's getting, the quote unquote Nick Chubb style role where he's getting early down work, and then they'll probably end up splitting red zone work with the way that offense kind of work. I feel like that's probably the best. Samaje Perine just gets axed out of that spot. Hunt is a good pass catcher. They trust them both in pass protection. So if I had to guess how they would be used, you'd see sort of that where the eventual lead goes to Pacheco. But I think at least for this week, I'd still would assume a 60-40 split in favor of Kareem Hunt here.
If that's the case, do we sit Hunt?
I don't think this week. I think you can play Kareem Hunt this week,
even if he's only getting 60% of the touches.
Yeah, I think you can still get there because there's going to be I think some passing game work, and again the red zone, they might just split red zone work, and there's always a chance that one of them gets a touchdown. It's going to be a risk if they go to this split backfield, but it's. Again, what's your other options? It all depend on what your roster ends up looking like. Right?
That's the issue, right? Because I could see it if you look at your team, you have Kareem Hunt might just be staring at you as oh my God, I have to sit this guy this week. Or depending upon if you have a heavy wide receiver team and a light running back team, oh my God, I have to play Kareem Hunt this week. So consider your options here. Mile High Luke says he thinks Hunt is going to be the guy between the 20s. Pacheco gets goal line. I could see that, I guess. Sure. Pacheco was a full participant in practice today as well. The last part I want to bring up with the Chiefs here, Noah Gray, whose picture on ESPN.com, as I just see it now, thanks to Google, looks like one of the first guys not to get a rose on The Bachelor. That's just the image I'm seeing from him. However, he has been getting a rose from Patrick Mahomes. My goodness. 4 for 66 and 2 touchdowns against the Panthers, 5 for 23 and 2 touchdowns against the Bills the week before. Also gets multiple catches the week before against the Broncos. Mm-hmm. This is not a question of, hey, should I pick up Noah Gray and sit him or start him over Travis Kelce? This is a question of, what am I doing with maybe a guy like DeAndre Hopkins? I don't think we're considering starting Xavier. Maybe you're considering starting Xavier Worthy. Yeah. I don't think not Juju Smith-Schuster. But you think about DeAndre Hopkins. knowing that Gray has scored 4 touchdowns on 9 targets the last 2 weeks, does that make you more apt to say, you know what, I'm not messing around with Hopkins this week, I'm going to keep him on my bench? Or are these two things not related in your opinion, John?
I mean, I don't necessarily know you're going to bench Hopkins because of what Noah Gray is doing, but I think it lends a little bit more to maybe the offense that we're seeing with the Chiefs right now. I mean, if they're going to go with a heavier personnel because they don't trust their other wide receivers, you know, I don't know the breakdown of them being in like 12 formation with the 2 tight ends, but it seems like Gray and Kelsey are out there a lot. You know, they like to be able to run the football with Kareem Hunt. We've seen, you know, heavy workloads for him there. You know, that's just what they're doing now. And teams are going like, all right, we got to cover D-Hop. We got to get Kelsey covered. And Noah Gray just continues to develop into an offensive threat that Mahomes is going to. He's going to keep targeting him. He's going to throw to the open receiver, right? And that's just kind of what he's finding. And Juju Smith-Schuster's done nothing. Worthy's been way too inconsistent. You don't even see Watson, who was a guy that was making plays at times last year when they were down wide receivers. Like, you don't see any of those other guys really doing anything when it comes to catching the football. So he's just kind of relying on the tight ends and running the football right now.
That's going to wrap up our preview. I'm going to cut it short here. That's going to wrap up our preview of the Thanksgiving Day games and the Black Friday games. Remember, if you're playing in the FFPC or any other format, get your lineups in early. And for those of you playing in the FFPC, make sure you're making the proper adjustments, not only for week 13, or if you can afford it, week 14, as you work ahead to try to make sure that you have the advantage on your opponents going forward. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. You can utilize a lot of these guys we talked about if you get your lineups in by kickoff on Thursday of the Lions-Bears game. If not, no problem. You can use the other players that we haven't talked about yet for the 1 o'clock Sunday FFPC Weekly Challenge. MyFFPC.com is where to go for that. 10 or 12 players if you want to play with kickers and defenses. $35, $200 to enter, win up to $2,500. MyFFPC.com, MyFFPC.com is where to go. We have answered a lot of starter sick questions tonight. We're going to answer a bunch more of them for you, including players like Travis Etienne, Amari Cooper, Pat Freiermuth, Matthew Stafford, and more. He's Jon Impemba from FantasyAlarm.com. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, but they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Like, here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky.
Oh, no way!
is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
22 minutes until the top of the hour. You're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the Fantasy Football Players Championship right here on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman at Eric Balkman on the X and Blue Sky. He is Jon Impemba on X as J Impemba 777. You follow all of his work over at the Fantasy Alarm, fantasyalarm.com. We'll get into your start and sit questions here before we wrap things up and call it a day. John, first question from Mile High Luke. He has to sit. Oh, God, and it got cut off on my screen. I apologize. He has, maybe Matt, our producer, Matt Deutsch, can throw it up on the screen. He has to, thank you, Matt. You are the man. So he has to sit one of these players. Davante Adams, Ladd McConkey, or Tyrone Tracy. This is FFPC, obviously full point PPR, tight end premium scoring, which doesn't really make a difference for this question. But Tracy is playing on Thanksgiving in Dallas. You have Davante Adams this week, who is going to be going up against the Seattle Seahawks at home at JetLife Stadium. And then you have McConkey coming on the short week where he is going up against the Falcons in Atlanta. Your thoughts here. Who is he sitting? Is he sitting McConkey? Is he sitting Davante Adams? Or is he sitting Tyrone Tracy?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely playing Tracy. You're probably sitting McConkey. But it's, I like teams that are out of a bye. They're home. The Jets have had their issues. But the upside, I think, for Adams is just there. I don't know if McConkey is going to do enough this week against Atlanta, like you mentioned, on the short week as it is. So give me Adams, give me Tracy this week.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. Like, the total on that Chargers-Falcons game is 48. But, and as good as McConkey's been this season, how much upside is there? I mean, is there really like a 9 for 130 and 2 touchdown game with
did
McConkey?
It once, right?
Yeah,
everything else has been very minimal.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and we've seen blow up games from Adams. We've definitely seen it. We've seen blow up games from Tracy. Now that I would say and this really surprises me. I'd probably take the over in this game. Seahawks Jets 41.5. Yeah. That seems low to me. I feel like that should be higher. And then obviously not that I want to make decisions solely on the total. Giants Cowboys only at 37 in that game. So you could make the case that McConkey is in the shootout, of those, but I don't know necessarily if that makes him a better start. To your point.
I mean, like, if Dobbins ends up being ruled out, maybe they lean on the pass a little bit more, and there could be some value there, but. It feels like the ceilings are greater for Adams in this spot against Seattle to me.
I would agree with that for sure. Let's get into some running back starts and sits this week. How about Najee Harris, who is going up against the Bengals on the road? You can start him, or you can start Ramondre Stevenson, who is at home against the Colts. We know that the Patriots struggle to stop the run. What about the Colts stopping the run? And Ramondre Stevenson this week? Is he a better start than Harris?
I think I would still start Harris this week against the Bengals, but it is definitely a good spot for Stevenson. The Patriots just don't score points, so even if he gets 20 carries, he hasn't really run for a ton of yards. He gets some involvement in the passing game, not a ton. He needs a touchdown here. I feel more confident, I think, in Najee Harris this week than I would Ramondre Stevenson.
Yeah, I always channel the Dow of Baker Boy, Joe Del Zanero, one of the longtime great FFPC players, will tell you, like, you don't start players on teams that don't score touchdowns.
No,
and they don't score touchdowns in New England. With apologies to you being a Patriots fan, I get it.
I lived a great life for Tom Brady. Now we're working through it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on with the Browns here. Nick Chubb this week, who, I would say that he's kind of been underwhelming, but as a guy who has Nick Chubb in a few leagues, I knew what I was getting into when I drafted him, when I traded for him after that injury. He is at Denver this week, not the greatest of matchups. Travis Etienne and I guess the Tank Bigsby aspect will come into play here with Travis Etienne. He is at home against the Texans. Do you have a lean either way between Etienne and Chubb this week?
Yeah,
so no, you don't.
Yeah, not really. I really don't. I mean, again, Jacksonville's offense is not very good. But Chubb, like you said, hasn't been efficient. He did score twice last week, and he did it against it in a tough matchup. So I might lean Nick Chubb if I had to pick one.
I think that's the way I would go as well. I'm just looking at this right now before we move off of this. Bigsby was on bye this past week, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Jacksonville was.
And we knew that he was ruled out fairly early. No, it was Friday. So well, I guess that's kind of early. He was ruled out in Friday in week 11, and I have not seen anything about his ankle injury since then. But if he's able to go, I mean, I don't want to say slam dunk Nick Chubb, but if Bigsby's going to be messing around out there, yeah,
Right.
I have Chubb in my lineup. And then the last one here for running backs that we'll get into, Justice Hill. He of the 51-yard touchdown run on Monday Night Football. Proud and embarrassed to say I had him in one of my lineups this week. Justice Hill against the Eagles. That game is at home. Or you could play Javonte Williams for the aforementioned Denver Broncos, who are at home against the Cleveland Browns. Hill or Williams this week, John?
I don't know what Denver is doing with their running back positions. Week to week, it feels like it's been very fluid. We saw McLaughlin get carries. We saw the estimate week, and then Javonte had the week after that. But Justice Hill, his role itself is very limited, but at least it's specific. I think I go Justice Hill here, but I don't feel great in either situation. So
yeah, it's weird to say Justice Hill's the floor play, but he might be this week, like, because you know what you're getting with him. You just don't know what you're getting with Javonte Williams. It kind of depends the situation you're in. Like, if you're an underdog this week and you're going to need some points, yeah, I'll just roll the dice with Javonte Williams. But if you're the favorite and need a running back, then yeah, he'll probably get you 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Wide receivers. Let's move on here. We talked about Deebo Samuel earlier. Let's talk about him again right now from a Week 13 standpoint. Deebo Samuel is in Buffalo to take on the Bills this week. If you had him or you had Jerry Jeudy in Denver, who we already talked about, probably getting the Patrick Surtain treatment.
Yeah.
Who would you play, Samuel or Jeudy? Neither one of these pretty desirable in Week 13.
This is a quarterback decision, actually. If Brock Purdy is your quarterback, I think maybe you go Deebo Samuel. If he is not, you're going to go Jerry Jeudy here.
And we will know, both those games are Sunday, right? Yeah. Yep. So we'll know in plenty of time whether Purdy is going to play or not. Sticking with that Bills game, Amari Cooper in that game against the San Francisco 49ers, or would you play Tank Dell? Tank Dell, who's obviously not going to have to deal with Stephon Diggs, but has been dealing with Nico Collins in that same lineup. Tank Dell is in Jacksonville this week. On the surface, it seems like a pretty advantageous matchup. Cooper or Dell for you, Jon Impemba?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Tank Dell here just because it is that good of a matchup going up against Jacksonville. I know San Francisco's had their own issues, defensively of late as well, especially against the pass. But I'm gonna put my trust in the Houston passing attack, and that Dell will be able to get some plays this week.
Tank Dell, I just want to look at his. So this past week against Tennessee in a loss, 3 for 72. Refresh my memory, John. Did Nico Collins play against the Cowboys in Week 11, or was he not back yet?
No, he was back.
He was back, and that was 4 for 54 for Tank Dell that week. So, yeah, even with the return of Collins, he's still been churning out yardage along with a few catches. Hopefully he does that again this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, you would say like, oh, it's a game where they should get up early. Well, Detroit got up way early on Jacksonville, and they kept their foot on the gas the whole game, and everybody benefited from that game as well. And then a weird flex question here for anybody who is scrambling for whatever reason at wide receiver in a week where nobody's on bye. What about Noah Brown at home against the Titans defense, which I think the Titans pass defense, not nearly as good as the rush defense, but I'll let you weigh in on that. Noah Brown or Adam Thielen, who we expect is going to play this week. Adam Thielen is at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He got back off of IR against the Chiefs this past week, only saw 4 targets, 3 catches for 57 yards. Thielen or Noah Brown this week, John?
Honestly, I'm going to go with Adam Thielen. He played 61% of the offensive snaps, and I think that's just his return snap share. I think we're going to continue to see that kind of go up. They had Jalen Coker inactivated last week, so he wasn't even a problem as a guy stealing snaps. I think, we saw Thielen play 94% in week 2. So they're certainly willing to put him on the field. So, give me Adam Thielen this week.
Jalen Coker, as you pointed out, was inactive with a quad injury. This was something that he was not even on the injury report to start the week this past week. He was added on Friday and obviously didn't play. If Coker recovers enough and he plays in this game, does that I guess how much does that affect Thielen's production if Coker finds a way to get active this week?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to impact him too much. I think Thielen's just kind of their guy. He's a veteran receiver. He's a safety blanket. They lost Ja'Tavion Sanders, which I don't think can be understated. He was a really good pass catching tight end for them. Tommy Tremble's never profiled as that guy that can kind of go out there and catch football. So to me, I think Thielen's going to be just a guy that Bryce Young can trust and have that veteran presence on the field.
Total on that game, 46.5. The Panthers are indeed a 6-point underdog. So that is definitely a positive game script for Adam Thielen, Bryce Young, and Carolina. Let's move on and talk tight ends here. Dallas Goedert or Kyle Pitts. We talked a little bit about Pitts earlier in the program, but I'll bring this up with Dallas Goedert here. Kyle Pitts is at home against the Chargers. Goedert this week is going up against the Ravens on a short week. Granted, it is in Baltimore, but Goedert, since he's come back, only 2 for 25 in his first game back against Dallas. He does find the end zone in that game, and then 5 for 61, and then 4 for 19. Goedert and Pitts, I want to say for people who drafted him this year, you've probably been underwhelmed, but if you have to make a decision on only one of these guys playing, I don't know if this makes a difference or not, John, but let's frame it in FFPC tight end premium scoring. Which way are you leaning here between Goedert and Pitts?
Yeah, if Devonta Smith doesn't play again, I'd be interested in Dallas Goedert in this matchup against Baltimore. Devonta Smith missed last week, with the hamstring injury. So if he's out again, I would go there. Otherwise, I think I would go Pitts if I had to pick. He's just the target opportunity for Goedert just really is limited when both wide receivers are healthy.
Pay attention to this on Sunday morning, too, when you're in your still turkey tryptophan comas, because Pitts will be kicking off at 1 p.m. that day, but Goedert is in the late window at 4:25. So be looking to find out any inkling you can about that about that Devonta Smith injury news, because if you are finding out that the Eagles are leaning one way or the other, it could shift your belief in Pitts over Goedert or vice versa here. Scott Kobe chiming in. He asked us the Tyreek Hill question before. Let's ask it again, but framed with the other guy he's considering. Tyreek Hill or Courtland Sutton this week. Tyreek Hill, obviously, Thursday night against the Packers in Green Bay. Courtland Sutton is against the Browns, and I have been doubting Sutton all year, and I've been reluctantly starting him, and I've been pleasantly surprised. I don't know if I'm strong enough to start him over Tyreek Hill this week. Should I be strong enough to bench Tyreek Hill for Courtland Sutton in Week 13?
I would play Courtland Sutton over Tyreek Hill this week. Wow. At home, Cleveland, their defense is good, not great. I know they have their strength is certainly their secondary, but again, the Denver offensive line is giving Knicks plenty of time to just sort of wait for guys to get open, and he's been more accurate than I expected. And he and Sutton, ever since Sutton put up the goose egg, have been just in sync with each other. So I definitely trust Sutton more this week than I would Tyreek in that sub-zero weather there, where again Miami has generally just struggled in those kind of temperatures.
So let's play a real quick game here. Player A versus player B. Player A, John, over the last 5 weeks, 8 for 100, 7 for 122, 6 for 70 and a touchdown, 7 for 78, and then 8 for 97 with 2 touchdowns. Player B has gone 1 for 8, 6 for 72, 4 for 80, 3 for 16 with a touch, 7 for 61 with a touch, 5 for 48. Would you rather start player A or player B this week? Just not even knowing matchup.
I think A.
I would go player A as well. Player A is Courtland Sutton. Player B is Tyreek Hill, which he's gotten in the end zone, which has kind of saved him from like 3 for 16 is a disaster, but he got 11 yards rushing and a touchdown that week. And then 7 for 61 with a touchdown. That was against the Raiders, which is a pretty good matchup. So I think that I have to find my wherewithal. I have to find my strength to start Courtland Sutton over Tyreek Hill, since that's the advice we're giving Scott Kobe this week. Bench Tyreek Hill in favor of Courtland Sutton. Okay, moving on back to tight ends here. Hunter Henry or Dalton Kincaid is the next one facing us here. Hunter Henry, of course, we talked about him in the first hour of the show, at home against the Colts this week. Dalton Kincaid coming off the bye and taking on the San Francisco 49ers at home. I know that Fred Warner and the Niners defense has had an extremely good track record playing tight ends, at least for fantasy purposes.
Yeah.
Tight ends going against the Niners usually come up little. Kraft was okay last week for the Packers, but part of that was buoyed by a touchdown that he got in the first half. I lean towards Henry here over Kincaid.
Yeah, 100%. 49ers, were for a long time this season, were allowing the fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. Obviously, last week again, you were able to get the touchdown, but it only came on 3 catches here. Where the Colts are not a good team defensively against the tight end position. So give me Hunter Henry here.
I've heard a lot of Zach Ertz conversation over the last couple of weeks, over the last month or so, I would say, where he has come into being a must flex every week in the FFPC. But what if we get into where you already have strong flexes and you can't play both him and Pat Freiermuth? Who is the right play this week? Is it Zach Ertz against the Titans, or is it Pat Freiermuth on the road against Cincinnati?
I think it's Ertz, honestly. Just the target share for Freiermuth has been a little disappointing. And then you had the report, not the report, just the facts, that they were even targeting Washington a little bit more than Freiermuth in that offense there. So since Russell Wilson became the guy. So certainly disappointing. I was bullish on Freiermuth coming into the year. I thought he had a chance to be that number 2 guy in that offense. I mean, he's coming off of an okay week, but for the most part, it's been a pretty bad season for Pat Freiermuth here. So give me Ertz, especially, again, if those running backs are down, they may have to throw the football more in Washington this week.
Completely underwhelming for Freiermuth this year. He's had 1 game of 5 catches. Everything else has been 4, 3, or 2. So there is a little bit of a baseline where he's not putting up a goose egg for you. But at the same time, what they have been doing with Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, George Pickens, Harris, Jalen Warren now, it's working. And there's, to me, there's no reason to get Pat Freiermuth any more involved than he has been. Zach Ertz, on the other hand, been significantly involved in the Washington offense and certainly a guy I trust more than Pat Freiermuth this week. We do have a few minutes left. Let's get into quarterbacks here. Jon Impemba from Fantasy Alarm. Justin Herbert, who had a solid week last night against the Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football. If you have him and if you have Patrick Mahomes, who would you start? Herbert on the short week in Atlanta, or Patrick Mahomes at home against the Raiders?
Yeah, give me Mahomes. He has some ungodly numbers in his career against the Raiders, having him be home. I'm not even really worried that it's a low point spread. It's 42.5 because the Chiefs are 12.5 point favorites. So even Vegas, sure, maybe not a lot of points will be scored, but the Chiefs are going to be scoring a lot of points. So give me Mahomes on this one.
Yeah, you made it pretty quick. Is that like a dumb question for Herbert and Mahomes, or is that something that seriously we should be considering?
I mean, for me, my just snap thoughts are Mahomes is he's coming into a pretty good form here. He's throwing touchdowns. It's not a good matchup against. I mean, it's a good matchup for him against the Raiders. I would trust that a little bit more than the Chargers going on the road against Atlanta this week.
So there you go. There you have it between Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes. Let's move on here and talk about Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud. Anthony Richardson at New England. God, I feel like we've talked a lot about the Patriots and Colts fantasy players this week. Anthony Richardson at New England or CJ Stroud, who is at Jacksonville this week. Really good matchup for Stroud.
Yeah, I'm going to lean Stroud. It also wouldn't stun me if Richardson comes out of New England with 2 rushing touchdowns this week, just how bad they are against the running game. But Stroud, just has the easy matchup against Jacksonville here. So give me CJ.
So you're going Stroud here, and I'm with you on that. Matthew Stafford or Russell Wilson, the last one. And I hesitate to bring this up because, again, there's no buys this week. Hopefully you're not counting on this, but if fate dealt you a blow with Dak Prescott or something like that, where you can't count on your starting quarterback and you have to go with Stafford or Wilson this week, who would it be? Maybe it's a second guy of a super flex where you lost Daniel Jones or something. I don't know. But Stafford, who is going up against the New Orleans Saints in New Orleans this week, or Russell Wilson, who we talked about, is on the road in the, what is it, the Queen City, or is that the Emerald City? It's the Queen City, is Cincinnati, right?
Honestly, I have no idea.
I'm gonna look it up while you answer this. Russell Wilson in Cincinnati, whatever it is.
Russell Wilson. No, it's They're going against the Jets, right? Seattle. So, Russell Wilson.
Russell Wilson. Yeah.
For whatever reason, I was thinking Geno Smith in my brain. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter. You know why? Because the answer is Matthew Stafford. We're going to go Stafford against New Orleans here. New Orleans secondary has been garbage. They don't have Lattimore anymore. Nakua and Cup. Yeah, give me Stafford in this spot here.
According to Google, the Queen City is Cincinnati as well as Charlotte, North Carolina. So I don't know how there's 2 Queen Cities in the United States, but somehow there is. So there you go. There you have it with our starts and sits, our Black Friday preview, our Thanksgiving preview, and of course, everything going around the NFL tonight. Thanks to Jon Impemba from fantasyalarm.com, at fantasyalarm on the X, at jimpemba777. Jon, give us a reminder, all the times that people can catch you on Sirius, all the stuff that you're churning out with Fantasy Alarm. What's the best way to keep up to date with that?
Yeah, I'll be on Sirius XM tomorrow with Bender. We're doing the Thanksgiving turkey draft, so you can catch me there at 7:00. And then I'm always on the Fantasy Alarm YouTube channel. You can find me live every day, 5 p.m., breaking down the NBA DFS slate. We also do a preview show, which is recorded the night before. You can find that anytime over on Fantasy Alarm. Occasionally, you'll find me in the Alarm Fantasy Football shows that we do there. I'll be live Thanksgiving morning with Howard Bender answering start-sit questions at 10:30, so you can go tune in there. And then all my work everywhere is all over Fantasy Alarm, football, basketball, soon to be baseball. So I am plastered NFA over there.
He is the hardest working man in the business. Follow him at jimpemba777, at Fantasy Alarm, and fantasyalarm.com, SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, and the Fantasy Alarm YouTube channel as well. Jon, this was awesome. Thanks for coming on at short notice. I really appreciate it. We'll have to do it again sometime when our schedules match up for sure.
100%. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is Jon Impemba. For him and our producer, Matt Deutsch, I want to say thank you for watching the Fantasy Football Players Championship high-stakes fantasy football show here on the Better Sports Network. No show this Thursday. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. We will be back a week from this coming Thursday, December 5th. Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros will be my guest co-host. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge at myffpc.com. Thanks so much for watching. Happy Thanksgiving. And be good. Hopefully the ball bounces your way this week. We'll talk to you again on December 5th with Pat Fitzmaurice.